Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Chestnut channel. Thanks for joining us today. Well, with me is a gentleman I've been wanting to talk to for quite a few weeks. His name is Callum Urquhart, and he's a freelance ranger and naturalist for the Aegis Field Centre in Inverness, Scotland. He's been working with them for several years, particularly with the Wildcat program, the Scottish Wildcat, which is what we're interested to talk to him about today. How are you, Callum?
Yeah, I'm very well. Thank you, Ray. Yeah, good to finally be able to catch up with you properly and speak with you today.
Absolutely. I've been in contact with the Aegis Field Center for quite a few years now with Dr. Lister. We do some fundraising in New England with the Highland festivals here, and I was in contact with him concerning that, and I decided to get back with Aegis and talk to someone closer to the cats, which is yourself. So that's it. Can
Yeah,
you tell us about
fantastic.
what you do and what you plan to do, what's been done, anything?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Wildcat program at Aegis has been going for quite some time. We actually Scottish Wildcats here as part of a captive breeding program
Okay.
in 2011. So we've had them for
Wow.
over a decade now.
Wow.
And at that point, it wasn't really known in detail what the picture was with Scottish Wildcats in the wild, other
Okay.
than they were really disappearing at an alarming rate.
All right.
Um, and so there were a few centres, including ourselves, who basically were taking cats on from often from other people who already had them in captivity and starting to breed them with an aim to sort of building up like an insurance population, essentially a captive population to prevent them from becoming completely extinct.
Sure.
So that was set up at Aegis in 2011. Um, Over time, this has kind of grown and is now a centrally coordinated project by RZSS, which is the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, based at the Highland Wildlife Park in the North Cairngorm, so only about an hour down the road from us here at Aegis,
Yes.
so still in the Highlands of Scotland. And the project has really grown massively. It now includes just over 40 institutions across the whole of the UK, um, breeding and sort of holding wildcats.
Hmm.
It's now around about 180 Scottish wildcats in captivity in Britain. And what they've essentially realized is that they have become what they call functionally extinct in the wilds in these last few years.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that there's none left. It just means that there are so few, and they are likely to all be hybrids with feral cats, which is something we can come on to, um,
Yeah.
that they don't have a sort of self-sustaining wild population anymore. So as of last year, cats have actually started being released again
Hmm.
from cats, sort of bred within the project to
Right.
try and bolster remaining wild populations and basically try and bring them back to a better place in the wild again.
Yes. So there's a certain amount of what I might call purity in the ones that are selected for the breeding.
Yeah, so essentially, there's again over the years they've developed quite a complex sort of genetic test, and
Okay.
this has been based on museum specimens of Scottish wildcats before hybridization started occurring,
Right.
but also it's been based on the European wildcat, which is actually the same species as the Scottish wildcat. So the
Okay.
Scottish wildcat is just our kind of local variant, and every cat in the program is tested and you sort of get like a lower, middle, and upper value for its percentage purity. So it's not an exact science.
Okay.
And the lower value has to be at least 75% wildcat for them to be bred with.
All right.
Now, typically, let's say, you've tested your wildcat, it's come back with a lower value at 80, a middle one at 90, and upper one at 100. So we're saying it's somewhere between 80 and 100% pure wildcat. Because it seems to be at least 80%, we'll breed with that as part of the project. If it's less than, then you've essentially got too much hybrid genes, and we wouldn't opt to breed with that cat then.
I see. And there's also visual qualification of a sort. Is that somewhat more exact than the blood testing or less?
It's actually probably even less. So it can be very difficult. on site to tell what is truly a wildcat. There are essentially sort of 7 metrics of the pelage or the fur that are
Okay.
used to estimate the purity of a wildcat.
Yes.
So this is mostly based on markings on the pelage, and you score them from 1 to 3, 3 being the best fit for a wildcat. And again, that can give you a good indication of the wildcat purity. So it's things like the shape of the tail tip. In wildcats, it's typically this sort of like really thick and a blocky ended tail that is
Okay.
solidly black and very blunt. Hybrids or just feral cats, tabbies, will tend to have a more tapering tail.
I see.
It's things like so wildcats have sort of black concentric rings around the tail,
Yes.
whereas these will be sort of blurred together or perhaps not full rings in feral or hybrids, and several other features too to do with kind of various stripings on the head and on the
Right.
legs, and distribution of white on the cat as well. So
Right.
a pure wildcat can have a white sort of chin, muzzle area, and even down to the chest a little. But any sort of white on paws or random other bits of the body is a pretty sure sign of being a hybrid or a feral cat. So yeah, there's those sort of metrics you can use which give a good picture, but the genetic test is better, even though it can give quite a range of results.
Right. Thanks. I had a talk yesterday with a gentleman in Germany who works with the wildcats there, and we actually were talking about the nose. Could be like a Caucasian flesh color only on the wildcat. If it's any black, it would be partly hybrid, is what, in his estimation, the nose itself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good one. And actually that's something certainly in my experience with captive wildcats, even ones that are maybe less pure, I've tended to see them all sort of having quite a sort of fleshy pink colored nose. But yeah,
Mm.
it could definitely be an indicator, particularly when you're looking at camera trapped footage. So in the initial kind of studies on how wildcats were doing, a lot of camera trapping was done, or sort of trail cameras
Of course.
were put out. And it can be very difficult, especially in black and white infrared images, to tell if something is even vaguely a wildcat or not. It can look amazing on an
Yeah,
infrared camera trap, and in real life, it won't even be the right colors. So things like having the pale nose can be really handy in that context, especially.
I see. Right. And also they're dancing around the bait quite a bit in the video. That's always tough to, they're trying to use that valerian root. Can you talk about that a little bit? Or do you use that yourself? Have you?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So, yeah, so there's various sort of like herbs, I guess, which can be used in some cases as an attractant for cats. In captivity, we use things so occasionally like valerian root, for example, or cinnamon sticks. Even we'll put these in their enclosures.
Hmm.
This is actually in the captive breeding program. It's a form of enrichment. So just having these unusual, what for them is a very strong, strange smell,
Sure.
can just sort of incite activity, exploring.
Right.
It's something you have to be very conscious of with captive animals, is that they are stimulated by their
Yes.
environment.
Fight boredom in a way.
Absolutely. Fight boredom and also keep them fit, keep them healthy, keep their sort of muscle tone, to try and prevent injury. And so things like the valerian root or even valerian tea bags
Yeah.
can be sort of hidden in the enclosure. And it just sort of, brings a bit of excitement. What's going on? What's that smell?
Right. Less what it is than just the unique part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just those. There seems to be some particular strong smells, cinnamon, valerian,
Right.
which incite that. Because other
Right.
herbs they don't seem so fussed about.
Right. I know we talked about some video and photos. You could probably, I'm going to be putting some things on our interview here after we're done. We'll have some videos of the cats and things we're talking about, Callum, if that's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Now, when you say enclosures and things at Agus or other places, they're largely away from any visitors, of course, and yourself too. You try to, what is it, at night you do things, or how do you try to keep them from knowing you?
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting question to get into, and it varies quite a lot. So some centers involved with the breeding program are essentially like sort of public wildlife parks.
Hmm.
Others, like ourselves, are very much not, and our cats are not sort of generally on show to the public, or our breeding cats are not.
Yes.
However, in the sort of husbandry side of things, it's actually, it's pretty much unavoidable that
Mm.
they are used to people. So
Okay.
they are seeing us every day. We have to go in and feed them, take out any remains from their enclosure, and we have to make sure they've got adequate sort of like bedding in their den boxes, and that's not getting sort of dirty or
Yeah.
like full of nasties. They do sometimes like to go and eat in their beds, which can create quite a mess.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so essentially, cats in captivity are used to people, and in fact, it can be useful to have them somewhat used to seeing people when it comes to, for example, vet checks and vaccinations, which are absolutely essential for the health of breeding cats.
Okay, I see.
So your cats in captivity, they don't tend to be happy to see us. We tend to get sort of a hiss and a scowl, but they'll keep their distance for the most part.
Yeah.
But they are used to people. And this is very important when it comes to looking to re-releasing them.
Hmm.
We don't want these cats to be used to people.
Yes.
So for the most part, cats that have been in this program their whole lives cannot be released.
I see.
So what they've done at Highland Wildlife Park, which is sort of where the project is being coordinated by RZSS,
Yes.
is they have built a sort of specialist, what they call the Breeding for Release Centre, which are sort of very much off-show enclosures.
Ah.
They assemble pairs of cats from lots of different organizations to get maximum genetic diversity as well as the purest cats that they can.
Yes.
They breed those cats, and then their offspring are really kept with minimal human contact as much as possible. So the keepers are in as briefly as they can be,
Okay.
really try not to interact with the cats.
Yes.
There's very high biosecurity in terms of people going in and out and animals going in and out. They're pretty much prevented by big electric fences.
Hmm.
And as young as is safe to do so, those kittens are then separated from the parents and basically put into almost like training enclosures, I guess, for release. So they're much bigger with almost entirely natural vegetation.
Okay.
And the food that they're given mimics a lot more what they'll actually see in their environment. So things like rabbit, they're sometimes given like a deer carcass in the winter that they'll be able to sort of pick at.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of scope for live prey to move in and out of that enclosure. Now, due to ethical reasons, they can't literally feed them live prey, but the enclosures are basically just, fences that are big enough to let small mammals and birds in and out. They're open top.
I
So
see.
they do a lot of their own hunting in these enclosures as well. So those cats are brought up basically not used to people, pretty much hunting for themselves daily and without sort of artificial denning sites.
Yes.
And when they're old enough, they are put into essentially enclosures out in the wilds, in the cairngorms, which is the site of their release. And then the doors are left open for them to go and release themselves, essentially. It's called a soft release. So,
On their own time.
yeah, exactly. And they will wander
Right.
out and disperse from there. And the first year of doing that was last year. The second year of releases will be happening very soon with kittens around about a year old, so born last year.
Okay.
But it's all being done from that one centralized breeding for release center. Because the other
Okay.
cats are just a bit too used to people. They would end up in more man-made environments and more likely to end up hybridizing with feral cats and potentially succumbing to sort of road collisions and things like that as well.
Sure. I must say, I want to thank you so much already because you've answered so many questions I've had for so long. This is really fascinating. Thank you so much, Callum.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, it's something I
Uh,
loved being a part of.
now, how about this then? So the year old when they leave, how old is a wildcat when it can breed? Is there a difference for male and female age, that kind of thing, or what are we talking about there?
Yeah, so they can actually breed at under a year. They can breed at about 9 months, despite not being fully grown until more like 18 months to 2 years.
Okay.
So they sort of almost, it's a bit like a lot of animals, they almost reach their like full length by about 9 months or so, and then they fill out
Yeah. Okay.
over the next year, say.
Right.
So they can breed at about 9 months. They will they will quite often breed at sort of a year to 2 years old. Um, they tend to be sort of trying to be mating in the late winter, sort of February, March time, to be
Okay.
then having kittens a couple of months later, just as you're getting into spring with the improving weather and a massive increase in prey.
Ah,
Um, and then they've got basically the whole summer for the kittens to mature before in the wild they'd be kicked out of the parents' territory at sort of 6 to 9 months old to go and find their own way.
okay.
And it's very much the mothers who hold the territory. The fathers breed and then move on. They play no part in that raising of the kittens.
Okay.
But yes, they'll typically breed sort of within a year or so. And in the wild, their life expectancy really, it's often only going to be perhaps 3, 4, 5 years.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough world out there, especially if they're sort of trying to bring up kittens.
Yep.
Um, it's very, very harsh winters up here. They're obviously adapted to it, but food is still thin on the ground.
Right.
So yeah, it's tough for them in the wild. In captivity, they're often carrying on until 10 or more years old
Ah,
because they're guaranteed a meal, they're guaranteed somewhere
right.
safe and warm, which
Right.
obviously is what we want for the welfare of them. But in the wild, sort of like 3 to 7 years old is going to be their general life expectancy. So they've got to start
Okay.
breeding young.
Yep.
Uh,
And they have what, 3 or 4
yeah,
kittens?
quite small litters. I mean, the average across the whole breeding program is closer to two than three.
Mm-hmm.
So very small litters. And again, that's just that, they're quite far north in the world. It's not like there's an enormous abundance of prey for them. It's
Ah,
quite
that's
hard
a
for them to
factor.
even find enough food for themselves, let alone provision. Let's say if they had 4 kittens, that would be a big, big litter, and likely that in the wild they wouldn't all make it.
I see.
Again, in captivity, the average is only sort of two, sometimes three. They can have up to 6 or 7. In the wild, if they had a litter that big, they'd likely end up with half of them dead, and they would actually eat those kittens if they
Sure.
died
Right.
in the wild. They would always sort of naturally get a bit of variation in size and strength within a litter.
Yeah.
So yeah, typically really quite small. Sometimes even just the one. You know,
And what about the male? Stays around or not?
the males. They're so the way in which I guess their sort of social interactions work. They're very, very solitary creatures for most of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Females will hold discrete territories that pretty much don't overlap. Males will sort of range between usually several female territories.
I see.
And they'll try if they can. Obviously, they'll be competing with other males and fighting them off if they're in their territory, but they'll try where they can to mate with a couple of females.
Mm-hmm.
But after that mating, they go completely their separate ways. So the males play no part in the raising of any kittens,
I see.
and they're basically solitary for 99% of the year.
Okay.
The females then raise up the kittens. Usually by the end of the summer into the autumn, they'll be trying to get rid of them because they've got to look after themselves over winter.
Right. Now, the ones that were released last year, is there any tracking? Is there a chip in them, or what, is there any way to keep track of where they're going and what they're doing?
Yeah. It's actually really good what they've done. So they're fitted with really sort of small, light, biodegradable collars, which have a
Oh,
sort of little tracking device on them. So it's very lightweight,
yep.
designed over about a year to basically degrade and then fall off, which roughly coincides with when the satellite tracking devices would be all out of battery as well.
I see.
And for their first year, their movements have sort of been tracked. You can find every now and then they publish updates on the Saving Wildcats website
Mm-hmm.
about this. So Saving Wildcats is the name of the sort of coordinating project as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Because I've been trying to sort through some of that. Who's who and who's what and who's in charge of what. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
They're the clearinghouse for a lot of this.
Yeah, so they used to be called Scottish Wildcat Action. That was the sort of
Okay.
initial project that was born from realizing wildcats were in really serious trouble. We need
Yes.
to captive breed. In 2020, at the end of that initial 5 year period of Scottish Wildcat Action, they
Mhm.
rebranded Saving Wildcats with a focus less now towards expanding the captive population and more towards maintaining it and using it to breed and release cats.
I see.
But yeah, so they've been tracking them, and I think at the last update, all bar one, so I think they released 18 or 19, and all bar one had survived through the winter, which was really pretty good.
Right.
Um, they'd mostly stayed roughly within an area of the northwest Cairngorms that they were released. One or two had gone much further afield, an example of what they call hyperdispersal,
Hmm.
which naturally would help to mix the genetics of populations really well.
Yes.
Obviously, in this case, they've basically just gone where there are no other wildcats.
Ah,
But longer term, they'll keep releasing in the same area for a while to try and build up a really solid population.
yeah.
And longer term, other cats will hyperdisperse and they will likely start to bud off and form little populations elsewhere, which is just what you want, really.
Huh. Interesting. Uh, you were talking about the valerian root earlier. So as an attractant to know where the camera traps could be targeted, this is one of the uses of that, correct?
I've actually not come across that in the UK with the valerian root. Typically, there's been basically just huge networks of camera traps put out in
Okay,
places where wildcats were thought to be.
I see.
And then if there are any sightings or possible sightings in an area, sort of suitable, perhaps sort of walkways or have been identified, where they've found mammal tracks and they've camera trapped in those areas. So I haven't heard of it being used as an attractant like that, but that's interesting. So did you say were they doing that in Germany with the European wildcat?
Oh, sure, absolutely. And I thought that you were as well, Callum. Sorry about
Hmm.
that, but I did. Yes. So
No,
they use
they
it.
may well be. I mean, I've not been involved with the sort of like
Okay,
um, that side of things with the
right.
wildcats and hybrids, so that they may well be.
Well, it's that steak that you see in a lot of his videos anyway. He has a thing called Photon Studio with a PF. That's his YouTube channel on his
Hmm.
cameras, and you'll see a wooden stake, a 3 foot wooden stake in the picture at night, and it has the valerian oil on it, and it has they cut it with a knife from the bottom up along the corners of it to make it very ragged and jagged, and then the animals rubbed on that and leave their hairs so you can tell what's there. That kind of a thing. I think this is a precursor to if they're going to trap something, they know that that's in that area or not.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah, and they actually found an area where nothing is attracted to that valerian. Most all animals are very crazy for it and just go nuts about it, from raccoons to otters to anything predator wise. But there's a place they have them, and they have still not figured out why nothing even pays it attention there.
Hmm.
Very interesting to them.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yes, I'll put you in touch with him. Um,
That'd be good.
his name is
Thank you.
Stefan. Yeah, that's one of his. That's really got him scratching his head.
Hmm.
So let me see what else we're gonna. So I know Dr. Lister started all this quite a while back. So can you describe Agus a little bit? It's a visitor center, right? You stay there overnight often. What sort of a place is it?
Yeah, so what Agus Field Centre does, yeah, it's set up by Sir John Lister Kay in the 1970s.
Okay.
And what a sort of field centre is, I guess, is essentially a place of field study, of conservation projects, but
Okay.
it's also a sort of base for essentially, so yeah, people can come and stay here, usually on week-long programs, and they're sort of given, I guess, educational weeks looking at wildlife and learning about the environment of the
Right.
Scottish Highlands.
Sure.
So going out and looking for sort of some of our key species, things like golden eagle, for example,
Hmm.
but also, you know, using it as a way of learning about the different environments and habitats of the Highlands, some of
Yes.
the conservation challenges and successes, and also, how the sort of human history, for example, has tied into what we see in the landscape today. Um, and then Field Centre is also a base for a number of conservation projects. So one of those being that we're part of the Scottish Wildcat captive breeding program.
Right.
We've also got a Eurasian beaver, what we call demonstration project on site. So
That right.
beavers have been extinct in Britain since the 1600s, are
Mhm.
now being released back in lots of places. And Agus, all the way back in 2006, had beavers on our loch here, basically demonstrating what they can do for an environment. They're,
Yes,
of course, amazing ecosystem engineers.
absolutely. Right.
Lots of other sort of projects as well. For example, trying to regenerate our own woodland here onto what was once managed as a sporting estate, which was quite sort of bare moorland, not particularly wildlife friendly. It's now
I
sort of
see.
regenerating woodland and lots of other bits and pieces like that that we do. But we also have a really big and active environmental education arm who are essentially doing those sorts of things, but with children aged literally from 2 or 3 up to 18 and with young adults as well.
Oh, wonderful.
Going out into schools, nurseries, other sort of young adult education centres,
Yes.
and having those people to visit Agus to just sort of give people positive outdoor experiences and learning as well.
Sure. So many people don't understand the value of an ecosystem or how it works. Why one part of it is, if one part of it is subtracted, it just won't run anymore, and people need to know that kind of a thing. And
Exactly.
so
Yeah, yeah.
speaking of turning out generations, you're people like yourself are trained at Agus, are they not?
Yeah, so a big part of what we do is what's called the Agus Ranger Training Scheme. So
Mhm.
we essentially have a team of mostly fairly young wildlife guides who are leading these sort of week-long programs.
Yep.
And part of what Agus does is essentially set up sort of natural history, zoology, geography graduates with a comprehensive sort of training program. It's about 8 weeks long in the early spring before our main season begins,
Yep.
learning all about the Highlands, its history, its wildlife, its ecology, its geology,
Nice.
everything there is, and learning wildcat husbandry as well, and various other sort of tasks that need completing on the estate.
Yep.
And they're then given a sort of paid job for the season, leading these sort of educational weeks,
Mhm.
looking after wildcats, doing all sorts of other bits and pieces, and sort of generally, teaching people about that natural environment and world.
Right.
Yeah, I sort of first trained with Agus in 2018,
Okay.
actually as part of my university degree. Then returned as an Agus Ranger and managed the Wildcat program here for a number of years. And I now still work very closely with Agus as a sort of freelance guide, and still, really work with the Wildcat project as well.
Sure. Yeah, I'm so glad I asked for someone close to the Wildcats like yourself.
Yeah,
Nothing
so I sort
against,
of managed the project for around 3 years here.
right. Nothing against Dr. Lister K, but I wanted to someone that's in there with his boots next to the cats. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yes. So you've had a few busy weeks. I know you wanted to put me off for a few weeks with this. That was because of all the training in the springtime. I see that now. Very
Yeah,
important stuff.
essentially, just the beginning of our season is always very, very busy, and our new staff, of course, are out and about and super busy all the time. So having some more experienced people around is really important for that. But yeah, a very busy time for it, I guess, for sure.
Right. Great. Yeah, we've got probably about 6 minutes left here. Um,
Cool.
but I know that so I'll weave in some video or whatever we can find, photos, videos, whatever you think will augment our talk here, Callum, and
Yeah, sure.
put that together for everybody.
Perfect. And I
Yeah, so
suppose something that could be useful to touch on is just sort of briefly,
sure,
I suppose,
please.
how wildcats have ended up becoming functionally extinct, and particularly the issue of hybridization that I've mentioned once or twice.
Okay.
It's going to be useful. So I suppose, if you go back, say, 300-400 years, they were actually found UK wide as a species. We think of them as Scottish wildcat because that's the only place they've been for the last couple of 100 years. But if you go back to the 1600s, say, they were in
All right.
England and Wales as well.
Yep.
But basically, through a mixture, a lot of persecution by pre-Victorian and Victorian gamekeepers, and through sort of habitat loss and fragmentation, has really led to their decline. And what then essentially happened was they were mostly only found in the Highlands of Scotland in very low numbers and with a very fragmented population.
Ah,
So at the same time as that happening, you had an increased human population and an increased feral cat population.
hmm,
And what started to happen was when the wildcats couldn't really find each other, they would turn to breeding with feral cats. And you got a sort of steady dilution of this gene pool over the years.
I see.
So a hybrid is much more likely to pair with another wildcat, for example. Then
Right.
you've got lots of sort of three-quarter cats.
Right.
And it's kind of gone from there. But what they know from studies on European wildcats is when you have a healthy population, they will drive out feral cats within their territories. They are dominant, generally stronger and more intelligent than feral cats.
Yes, Stefan
And so
actually
the
said
idea,
that.
yeah, so the idea is just release lots into one area to create a strong population, and then maybe 5 years down the line, focus on a different site and keep releasing there for a few years and just get these big, strong wildcat populations that shouldn't be very prone to hybridization, and we hope will eventually link up with each other.
Right. And also disease is as well as hybridization, a disease from a cat that they encounter from a house cat is a concern as
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely. I mean, if they're encountering house cats, they'll often be vaccinated. It means they don't maybe get ill themselves, but they can still carry diseases to
Is
part
that
which
right?
they might pass on to wildcats. Yeah, so they can still be carriers.
Okay,
And that has been an issue for the wildcat for sure.
I see.
A big
Okay.
part of the early program was trapping, neutering, vaccinating, and then re-releasing feral cats.
Yes, right. I read about a lot of veterinarians, a lot of hours they put in, and a lot of pro bono hours from veterinarians to get a lot of that done.
Huge amounts, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think we've covered everything I'd like to, and I appreciate your time, Callum. I really do. Callum Urquhart, he's a freelance naturalist for Agus Field Centre in Inverness, Scotland, and he's been working with the Scottish Wildcats for quite a long time. And thank you for joining us, Callum. I'd like to talk to you again soon during the year, perhaps we can for an update. What do you think?
Yeah, brilliant. That'd be great. Yeah, thanks very much, Ray. It's been a pleasure.
Alrighty then. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Cheers, you too. Bye bye.
Bye bye. That's not everyone.